Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Storyteller's Corner. We're doing something a little bit different and extra today. I am joined by my good friend Amanda. We're going to be looking at Locomotive Breath. If you have seen the collaborations I've been doing on the Wiccan Conservative channel, you'll know that she was a special guest for Georgia Liberty and I one week when we talked about religious persecution. But today we're talking about something a bit more uplifting than that. But for anyone who hasn't happened to see that particular episode, Amanda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Amanda, and I am a friend of the channels. I am not a pagan, just as a preface, but I am an open Christian. I consider myself to be a Puritan, and on Blackbird's Brew here on Gilded, that you'll find me under Puritan View. Again, my religious background is varied. I come from a very rich history, a mix of Catholicism, paganism, and then myself now as a Christian. I find the worldviews interesting. I like talking to people about people things. So,
Awesome. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about the song and the lyrics, Locomotive Breath, that was done by Jethro Tull. This was a new song to me. You brought it to my attention. It was your pick. So, why this particular song?
the band itself, Jethro Tull, has been one of my favorites since childhood. I'm a big fan of progressive rock of the early 70s, late 60s. I really do think I was born in the wrong generation. But I did catch the tail end. So while I've never seen any of these bands like live in concert, didn't have the privilege of being a groupie or anything like that, I do follow them all in spirit. They touch my soul in a way that nothing else can. And so there's bands like Jethro Tull, Pink Floyd, and the list goes on. But this song in particular got a lot of radio play. I grew up listening to it on classic rock channels. And as I was a kid without any experience, the song was just intriguing to me. I didn't really quite understand it. But then as I became an adult, it took on a different meaning. And then when I became a Christian, it took on a different meaning. And then when I settled on my own theology and where I landed within that umbrella, it took on a new meaning. And so I think there's a lot to analyze there, just as on a psychological level, as a storytelling level. And then, of course, my Christian view now informs how I interpret the song to be, or what I think it's about. And it varies greatly from what Ian Anderson, the songwriter and lead singer of Jethro Tull, claims it to be about. In fact, I do not see his explanation in the song. And so I'm very intrigued by people who might see it that way, or that can see it, because I want to see it that way. I just can't.
Yeah. I think you bring up something really interesting. It's the subjective part of how we react to, whether it's music or art or sculpture or even a form of dance. Sometimes I think what we see is more so a reflection of us than it was necessarily what the creator had in mind, oftentimes to their extreme dissatisfaction. So, do you want to kind of give us the briefly of what the artist says it's about, and then we can go into where you're varying, and I can kind of chip in my own observations as we go along.
Yes. Okay, so he has been interviewed because it is quite an enigma of a song. It's very ambiguous in some of its terminology, but it seems to be a story of tragedy. And so when he said about it, was when he wrote it, he wasn't writing about anything in particular, but he was writing songs for the album Aqualung, which this song first appeared on. And so Aqualung is semi-religious. It does take a tack toward the Catholic religion specifically. But then, on a more broad base, the morality of the time, the early 70s, the late 60s, and, some things that he saw within the world that were injustices and things that were unfair to, in his eyes and his culture being there in the UK. And so It's interesting, but he says that the song is about the overpopulation and mismanagement of Earth. And but
Okay, that surprises me because that's definitely not where my thoughts took me. But okay, go on, go on.
he has stuck to that story his entire career. He's again saying that when he was writing the song, he had nothing really in his mind, but then, as the course of events, especially now today with almost, 8 billion people on the planet, it's really crystallized in his mind that that's what the song is about. But I don't believe him because he codes things within his songs, and the religious overtones are very strong on that album as well as songs that followed. So subsequent albums, following Aqualung, he did Passion Play. Okay, that's
Referring to the
overtly
Passion of Christ, yeah. I mean,
correct.
I'm on board with you on that. I mean, because I've got the lyrics, copied here in my notebook, and when you were talking about what he was saying or what he says about, I'm like, has he read his lyrics? Because that's not the impression I get at all, not even remotely. I mean, I think the song comes across as extremely overtly Christian in and of itself. And as I said, I don't have your long history with it. I just was kind of looking at it from where I am now. So, yeah, I think I think we're like this. I'm like,
Right,
don't know why he's saying what he's saying, but it's not matching the evidence.
right. But I do know that he's a genius. Ian Anderson, I have to put that out there, is a lyrical musical genius. And I believe he embeds codes into his songs so that if you know, you know. And if you don't, you don't. And he likes to make fools of the wise. And music producers were often those wise men that he liked to poke fun at. They didn't understand what his music was about. They understood that it sold records. So he was happy to oblige their greed and get a message out to the masses that, again, if you knew, you knew. If you were smart enough to read into it, you would really understand what he was talking about. But then again, in the publicity junket, he was going to give you some superfluous type of answer that would appease the pop culture, I guess, of the time, you know. And so just kind of, again, I think poking a little bit of fun at humanity's stupidity and
No,
ignorance to the deeper. So
well,
because
it's willful
I
stupidity and willful ignorance.
I base a lot of that on, again, my knowledge of the group itself, other songs, other albums, the tone of the rest of Aqualung. I've listened to that album my entire life. It's one of my absolute favorites. And again, there's some overtly religious critiques on that album. Hymn 43, for example, was one of those. And then, it's too much for me to just go, okay, well, he's just writing about, having too many people on the planet and destroying the planet. Now, again, I do concede that he's a bit of an environmentalist. He is
Hmm.
concerned with climate and, leaving room for nature and things like that. Yes, but we all are. I mean, none of us set out in the morning to destroy our home, our one and only planet. I don't think. I mean, I'm
I,
sure that these people do.
I yeah. I mean, I could see some people who don't necessarily think about, maybe we should be neat and tidy. But, I agree with you. I don't think anyone is waking up and saying, you see this planet, I'm going to burn it to this bitch to the ground. It's going to be epic. I'm going out in a flame of glory. I don't think, I mean, that's too much of the mustache twirling villain mindset,
Yeah.
which can be very funny, in certain types of storytelling. But I mean, it's not real life for sure.
I mean, if he was writing this maybe like from Klaus Schwab's, perspective, I could buy it. I could buy it. I'd be like, oh yeah, totally. But I do believe he's writing this from another's perspective, not his own, but of a personality that we're all going to be familiar with. And it's very similar to Sympathy for the Devil, to give you a little clue.
Really, that's what you got out of it. I kind of went in a different direction, but let's dive into where you were coming from and where you're finding it in the lyrics.
Absolutely. Okay, so it starts with the very first note. It's a piano solo. It's soulful. It's bluesy. It's sad. It's foreboding. And I believe that, again, Ian Anderson, being the musical genius that he communicates not just through the lyrics, but through the actual music. And so that sets the tone for the whole. So it's a blues song. It's a sad song. It's to invoke your sympathy for the writer, for the subject of the song. Opens in the shuffling madness of locomotive breath. Okay, that's something that sounds chaotic. And then runs the all-time loser headlong into his death. So where I come from, what I see that being is Satan. That's Satan. This is his song. He's writing. He's playing the piano. He's singing out the injustice of his situation. And so what it is he's on a mission. So from Genesis 3, God promises to send a Messiah to eradicate sin and death. He makes this promise to Satan as in the fall. And so then now Satan's got a mission to stop the Messiah. But he doesn't have the advantages of God. He's not omniscient, he's not omnipotent, and he's not omnipresent. So he doesn't know who the Messiah is. So he sets out on this journey of the shuffling madness. God's busy creating people, the planet's becoming populated, again with Adam and Eve, and then you have Cain and Abel. What's he to do? He has or influences Cain to kill Abel, the possible Messiah, the very first possibility. And he thinks that he's going to somehow again overthrow God. That's the continuing theme, I think, throughout the song is this is the story of how he's, where he is and how he got there. And so I'm going to read directly from my notes on this so I make sure I don't miss it.
Okay.
So as Satan is on a mission to stop the Messiah, problem is he doesn't know who the Messiah is. The locomotive breath mentioned in the lyric is that of the sovereign God that reigns as he pleases, unhindered and unmoved by Satan's attempts to thwart his promise made in Genesis 3. So that's kind of the opening premise.
Okay.
You tell me if that's, if you can see that kind of line of thinking there, if I'm defining the characters as you might see them.
Well, I think you're defining the characters definitely as you see them, not not my personal interpretation at all. I saw it from a much more human standpoint. When I saw the phrase "shuffling madness of the locomotive breath," locomotives to me, they're not chaotic. They are very rhythmic in their movements. Sometimes jerky with the starting and stopping, but still very rhythmic, very smooth. There's a pattern, and they're on a track that they cannot get off of. And with the shuffling madness, I think that also plays in with the idea of locomotives are something that are artificially constructed. They don't appear out of nature. So it implies to me that the subject of the song is in a life that is somehow untrue to them, or that has been consumed with distractions and following things that weren't important. They weren't nurturing important relationships. They weren't really contemplating who they were and how they fit into the larger tapestry of life. And now they're just kind of, they are both adrift and stuck simultaneously, and that is the source of the madness. So I think this will be interesting as we go through verse by verse, because we've got different stories in our heads on this one for sure.
That's good. Yeah, because I do agree with you on that. Because when I was, like I said, before I was a Christian, I could see that interpretation on it, and I still do, on a broad level of humanity is just vain and it's futile, and we worry about the wrong things all the time, and we're headed toward, eternity in such a way, whatever that means to each individual person. Unless you're an atheist and you think the lights go out and that's it.
Well, I would kind of push back a little bit on the idea of we're existing and the futility of it. I mean, that's very much antithetical to what paganism is. Paganism is very much an embrace of existence and life, and saying, there's even goodness in the bad. There is still value in your struggle in that. So, we. Yeah, we're not really looking at, this great vast eternity before us, because for us it's always the cycle, and where are you at in the cycle, and what lessons do you learn? So that is one difference in the perspective here.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm speaking to more is like the materialistic. So like
Yeah, kind of
this,
the soulless, I'm just going to get the most toys type of thing.
yeah, the I've got to have this job so I can get this car and wear this suit, and then you get to the end of your life and you're like, so what?
Did anyone love me? Did I love anybody?
Yeah,
Yeah,
final.
yeah, I see that. I do.
So yeah, so that's the characters as I see them in this song, and then it goes on. He feels the piston scraping, steam breaking on his brow. Old Charlie stole the handle, and the train, it won't stop going. No way to slow down. And so where I take that stanza is that he's under, and he being Satan, is under ever increasing pressure to find out before his own time is up. He can only presume that God will send a man in as the Messiah. Hence his position that old Charlie, which I define that character as humanity, stole the handle and will fulfill the promise. So again, old Charlie, there's been a lot of speculation about who that is. A lot of people going with that overpopulation theory think that that refers to Charles Darwin. That doesn't make a damn bit of sense to me, because Charles
Yeah,
Darwin, the theory of evolution was survival of the fittest.
yeah.
That doesn't go along with the why that would be a matter of overpopulation, because survival of the fittest and things like that is very death oriented and not life sustaining at all. And so if you take that approach, I'm thinking, well, no, old Charlie can't be that. It has to be something broader. And so what I think is old Charlie is just is a broad term. We use that term in American military to refer to the enemy. Well, who is Satan's enemy other than God? Humans. He doesn't like us any more than he likes God. So, it makes more sense to me that he'd be talking about a man. And again, going back to Satan's not omniscient, he doesn't know who he's looking for, and he doesn't understand God's plan as we understand it now, having that 2020 sight of the full revelation of the Bible. But in that time period, you're thinking early creation, he is freaking out. Everybody who's born could potentially be the one who's going to crush his head. So he's looking to get rid of that one person, and he's not being very successful, feeling the pressure.
Certainly, the frustration would be high in that. When I was looking at Old Charlie, especially after read the lyrics a couple of times, I wondered if that was referring to the God of Abraham, and that the subject in the song was thinking that perhaps they were being punished, or perhaps the way that that particular God, in their worldview, constructed the world. Um, that perhaps there was something about them that just subjected them to futility, and they had made it impossible for them to do a changing. It was very fatalistic, very Calvinistic, and that was an interesting contrast with the idea of the pistons and the train, because then that brings in the artificial construct. And it makes me wonder if that person had once been a believer, but then they found cause to really question their faith and looking at the premises, and they were viewing it as something that had been perhaps constructed in the name of a particular deity, but not necessarily by the deity itself. And because the pattern had gone on for so long that they saw no escape, they didn't see an alternative. They just saw that, well, if it's not this, then there's nothing. I almost feel like it's someone who's struggling, perhaps with atheism.
And that's a good, yeah, that's a good interpretation. I think that, again, like I said, on a broader, a good versus evil, or a meaning or purpose versus futility, that there's an internal struggle there for humanity, is where we fall. So, yeah.
And also with the steam breaking out on his brow, I mean, whenever we're severely stressed and pressured, even if we're not engaging in a physical activity, if it's just even mental or emotional pressure, well, it creates physical effects. I remember when I was in school to learn massage therapy, one thing our teachers really drilled into us is that stress kills people faster than anything. Everything else is symptomatic and consequential of the stress itself, which is why they said, then this is why your profession has value. But I think it's also very relevant to this song because, it's like he's sweating and he's just churning it. It's like his own internal engine, the combustion of the human body, being represented maybe by this technology, maybe not, but it is that internal combustion that is creating this overheated effect. And of course, what happens when people are overheated, either physically or mentally and emotionally? Well, they can't function as well. They can't think as clearly. So they become blinded to options. They become blinded to things that help them. So for me, this really set the stage for just, this is going to be tragic. This is going to be very, very tragic and sad.
So again, remembering that I view this as like a blues song, setting up that sympathy
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you're so.
And I don't think I've ever told you this, but I was raised in a small town about 30 minutes outside of Kansas City, Missouri. And Kansas City, Missouri is a very strong, very bluesy style. And my dad was into that kind of music. So I grew up, instead of listening to things other kids my age were listening to, I was listening to, yeah, Billie Holiday and Duke Ellington and all of these old blues and jazz singers and songs. And so the first notes of the songs, I thought, oh, this is going to be really bluesy. And then the flute came in. I'm like, okay, that confused me. But up until then, I'm like, okay, this is part of what was woven into my DNA. I definitely felt that mood for sure. And I think the second verse is like, yeah, that mood you felt a minute ago. That's where we're staying. Welcome to the emotional landscape, folks.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I again, I think it's setting it up for the "Don't you feel bad for me?" This is like his swan song, so to speak. It's just like it's again, "Sympathy for the Devil," by the Rolling Stones. Very, very similar, except that is obviously from a first person perspective, but this
Right.
is more a narration, which he does. Ian Anderson does speak a lot. He's songwriting style tends to be like a medieval musician.
Mhm.
And so he tells stories through song almost as a jester. And that's a lot, his performative concerts and things like that, with standing on one leg and wearing the costumes, very jester like.
Mhm.
And so again, I think there's some hidden clues in there about
Yeah.
really talking about, you know.
I agree. I am not buying his public story, not one iota.
Good, I'm glad. And I've never found anyone, never, just for the record, never that found anyone that says, "Oh yeah, I can totally see it, and here's how." No one can explain that to me. So if I ever get a chance to meet him, I'm going to be like, "Come clean."
Yes, please tell me, how did you arrive here? And use logic. Pretty
That's
please.
juxtaposed to the rest of your career. This song is so out of place. So,
Oh.
all right. So again, moving on. The next stanza is that he sees his children jumping off at the stations one by one, his woman and his best friend in bed and having fun. So
Which,
again,
ouch.
yeah, talk about the ultimate betrayals. I'm thinking, okay, so having your children abandon you, having your wife or your significant other in bed with all, your best friend of all people. It's that feeling of just ultimate betrayal, ultimate injustice. He's feeling bad for himself, and they're in those words. And so what I wrote as my note, I wrote, Satan feels deeply betrayed by men forgiven by God specifically. The
Oh, interesting.
station, yeah, so the stations in this stanza are the moments in time when they are justified by faith and inherit life eternal. Satan gets no such second chance. He sees this as being so unfair as they are just as sinful as he is. So again, that woe is me. Why does God show favor and grace to these lowly humans? I was the angel of light. I get no second chance. He promised to destroy me. He means it. I've got to stop that somehow. These people, which I corrupted, should be on my side, being my children, but then they are saved by faith and they are no longer mine. They're considered children of God now. They inherit the kingdom of God. And then how does that equate? Again, we're thinking from Satan's point of view. And then again, whether you agree with like God and Satan and that whole, but it's a story in
Right.
itself. If you're looking at this from that perspective, you've got a God and then a creation, and they're struggling it out, as to who is supreme, who is dominant.
I think that interpretation goes along beautifully with the narrative that you've been going through. Also, I mean, I agree. I mean, this is about betrayal of all betrayals. The only thing missing is that someone stole the dog. We nearly had a country music moment right here. But with the children jumping off, it does. I think it is abandonment, but I also think it's also, it's like dad isn't important anymore. And not just, he's no longer kind of like, the main force of the family. It's as though his children no longer see a reason to deal with him at all. Maybe they've wandered off for their careers, or, his daughter fell in love with someone he thought completely unsuitable, as daughters often do. And, suddenly, he's not, the most important man in her life. It's this other person, and he's worried because, I don't think he's going to treat her good, and whether these really worries are real or imagined isn't really the point. It's really just what he's feeling. It's just as though no one cares what he thinks, no one cares what he says, no one cares what he does. I'm getting some vibes of someone who feels incredibly unappreciated of everything
Mm-hmm.
he's worked for. It's just it's like, oh, this didn't mean anything to anyone. Which, oh, that's not a fun headspace to be in, as all YouTubers will know, because you put out a lot of content, you may or may not get reactions. I mean, it's just hard to say, but so you really have to be driven by passion and saying, this is still worth it, whether or not anyone cares about what I'm doing. And with the woman and the best friend, cheating on him and all this and that. I mean, it's hard to think of something worse that you could do to a man than mess with his wife. Because I think, especially in the wake of all of the feminist ideologies, I think we have really forgotten just how central the woman is in a marriage, about how when a man marries a woman, just how so much of his world and his life and his goals really revolve around her and any children that they have. In a way, I mean, for all it's talking about how, oh, women, they change their name, they sacrifice their identity, whatever. The world essentially revolves around us. It's really the man who, in a lot of way, is sacrificing a portion of his identity, or at least who he would be if he was unattached and fully free. He's giving everything of himself to make that work, and to have that trust betrayed, and also not just have it betrayed, with some stranger, which would be bad enough, but with his best friend. I mean, that's reinforcing of the no one cares about me. Nothing I have done matters. My whole life has been absolutely meaningless. And it was at this verse that I'm beginning to think, okay, this isn't just depression. This isn't just tragedy. This is suicidal ideation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I view it the same way. It's this desperation is
Mhm.
building. He's seeing the fruits of his labor being, evaporated before his
Yeah.
eyes.
And his
Allies.
life having no meaning. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's like your life, you just took up space.
right. Allies that he thought he had betray him. They, and again, if you look just through history, the evil men that have risen up throughout our cultures and our histories are said to have been influenced by evil
Hmm.
in some way. Now, whether we want to call that Satan or you want to call that just, being evil, whatever that is, we all agree that like people like Hitler were evil,
Oh,
you know,
yeah. I mean, I
you know.
think that's pretty much beyond dispute.
And so the fact that the world overcomes Hitler and says that's not okay, Satan again would feel, well, dang, I tried,
I
I,
mean,
I
that
got
does.
close,
I mean, that definitely fits in with how you've been looking at the song, and I want to kind of just bring out how when I came to paganism, I was really re-examining my premises and terms because I understood. I mean, like your example of Hitler, we all understand that he was evil and what he did was evil. It wasn't just his actions; there was something deep wrong with his mind and his soul. And so that got me to contemplating in my very early days about how the nature of evil must be corruption, taking something and twisting it and mangling it and making it serve a purpose that it was never intended to serve. And I think that's what the subject in the song is really feeling victimized. He's being feeling victimized by evil, by corruption. Oh, my children abandoned me and they don't care because something has gone wrong with them. My wife and my bestie, they have turned against me because something has corrupted them. But I think he's also overlooking the possibility that I do think that if your kids abandon you and if your spouse leaves you, that is a symptom of pre-existing problems, meant that something was already going wrong. And that means as you were a participant in those events, something also went wrong with you. And I do think to a certain extent, he is trying to avoid putting up that mirror to his soul that, no matter what faith or non-faith you have, periodically we all need to do and own what we have contributed to the unpleasant scenarios of our lives. Because we're never wholly innocent, are we? We can't, look at a bad situation that we're in and say, I really had nothing to do with that. No, you were involved. I mean, maybe you weren't the largest force in this, but you did something to contribute to it.
Exactly. And a lot of times I think that, our presence, but absence within that presence contributes to a lot of humanity's problems. The
Absolutely.
bystander effect. Oh,
Yes, yes,
I
I
was,
nag about that all the time.
yeah, I could have stopped it. I could have said something, but it's not my business. Or what was I going to do?
Why couldn't
That
someone else do this?
Right. It's not my job. Oh, I love that excuse. It's not my job,
Yeah.
you know?
We
So
certainly
I
hear
think,
that on the political front over and over again, and they're all waiting for a savior. And I'm saying, your savior's looking at you in the mirror. If we want to fix our society, that requires us taking individual responsibility. And yeah, isn't that, I didn't think we'd get this deep into this particular stanza, but I mean, we're talking about evil and corruption and not taking responsibility. I mean, this is big stuff.
again, as Satan as a character, he obviously does not take responsibility. He is angry at God for, God's rule over him, even when he, disavowed him. He's not free. He's not free of God's reign. God's sovereign. He's not, no matter what he does, and again, in that storyline, um, there's that victimhood. I have been wronged by the God of the universe, and he is out to get me specifically, and that's got to be overwhelming.
Yeah.
That's there's got to be. I mean, if I would be terrified if I were like the only sinner in the world, you know, and
It
I
would
thought,
take a persecution complex to a whole other level, wouldn't it?
yeah, going back to that whole religious persecution, I'd be like, woo, I don't know if I want to be there. So yeah, if we're looking at it from that perspective, and again, if we're looking at this song from the perspective of Satan and the story of how he got to where he is and who he is, then that would, again, building that sympathy. Oh, poor guy.
Yeah.
Like
And it's
God
intensifying.
dance, right? So it's so much is wrong with it. The next stanza reads, he's crawling down the corridor on his hands and knees. Charlie stole the handle, and the train, it won't stop going. No way to slow down. So reiterating that blame of humanity for all of his problems. And if they would just, stay with him, disobey God, he would win. God would be overthrown. The Messiah wouldn't come. Crawling. I view that again. I'm going to read my notes on it. It says, as more and more time elapses and more sinners are saved, and more targets, meaning the Messiah, prove not to be the Messiah, Satan is weakened by the battle, but presses on just the same. And it says growing more desperate each day. So the crawling, if you're in a fist fight and you are losing badly, but you're not going to give up, you may not want to get all the way down on the ground. You're going to try to get on your hands and knees. The corridor, I see that as being is time and space. So as we move through time and space like a corridor, it's linear. He's getting closer to his perceived, judgment day, and he's becoming weaker and weaker as because if we look back at biblical history and the stories of the Bible, men rose up of positions of power, and what is the first thing they always did? As soon as they were threatened by their rule, they killed all the boys, all the men. They, Moses, and again, going right back to Abel. So Moses was a victim of that. And then you had, stories like, Joshua was thrown into captivity. I believe that these are all little pictures. If you are familiar with biblical history in the Old Testament, they're like Satan's attempts. Again, he doesn't know who Messiah is, but he knows that if a person of importance or someone who rises to power could be Messiah, going again to that Jewish tradition that Messiah is going to be a man sent by God to overthrow the powers that be and establish Jerusalem and Israel forever on earth. Those kinds of things, we have to insinuate that Satan's running along those same thought processes. He's not omniscient. He doesn't know what God's plan, just like we didn't know, they didn't know. So taking yourself back in time to those particular stations where these children are jumping off, they're becoming saved by God. They could be the Messiah. Satan tries to kill them in one way or the other, or at least eliminate them. And then they prove, obviously, they die. They're not Messiah. So who is? That's the question. He's just desperate. He's like on his hands and knees. He's just like, what do I do? How do I do this? It's not working.
Oh man, you're giving me some flashbacks from my Jehovah's Witness days. They have a very thorough grounding of both Old and New Testament. So I remember those stories. I really do. When I was looking at this, I got the feeling of someone who's ready to be put out of their misery. I think it reinforces that suicidal tendency I was talking about in the previous verse. Again, he mentions how old Charlie stole the handle. I think we're still, he's blaming this God of Abraham, for his troubles. And it's not enough that you do this to me, because, obviously it was him who did it, at least for as far as he was concerned. But it's like, you won't even let me die. You won't even just let me go to sleep and die. And so he's crawling down, and I see this as someone who's starting to give up on doing the necessary steps to ensure survival. Maybe someone who isn't, they're not continuing to go into work. Then maybe they're not taking care of their health. Maybe they're not eating properly. Maybe they're starting to abuse drugs or alcohol. They're starting to do things to try to speed up the process so they can die, so they can be put out of their misery. And on this verse, I also picked up on what I feel like was resentment. and starting to not just be despair, but actually to be anger of why won't you just make this end?
Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah, as like I said, on a broad level of just injustice versus justice, and how a person may interpret what is fair. We all want to be treated in such a way, and when we don't get that way, we feel that we've been wrong. And it does feed into the psychology of self-pity and
Hmm.
then self-destruction.
Yeah.
Why do people commit suicide? That's a big question we'd all like to answer, and it varies, but I think the common thread is that they feel out of place and not needed, and even maybe a burden. And so if those things are playing into their psychological mind, that they can, self-prophesy that things would be better off without them, kind of, it's a wonderful life kind of feeling, I'm
Yeah.
we're dead.
And then, if we take that idea and feeling back to the idea of the train tracks and knowing that you're fixed on the tracks, they're not seeing the hope of any of passing through something and getting to the other side of it and being glad that they made it. They're just saying it's just going to be this never-ending process of despair. I mean, it's really sad, it's tragic, and it's one of those things. Once someone gets into that headspace, it is very difficult to get them out of it. And I in some ways, I also view this song as a cautionary tale of don't get yourself dragged down to this level, because the effort that's going to be required to get you up out of it is going to far exceed what it was when you slid into it. And that again brings up the idea of personal responsibility of, people, there's so much, blah, blah, blah about mental health. Well, are people actually doing things that actually do preserve their mental health or better it? Are they engaging in a life that where they do feel accomplished? I have done something. Do they have meaningful relationships? And not even, with marriage and family, do they even have meaningful friendships? And even if you want to make it even less impersonal, even their business relationships, are these people who you are really working together productively as a team, or is it just a matter of here's the enemy and I have to overcome them? I think it really is necessary, particularly in the future, because I do think things are going to get spicy and bad for us in the near term. I think we're going to have to take hold of ourselves and saying, what have I been cultivating? Because I think people are going to see I've been cultivating a bed of weeds. I could have spent all of this time making something better and more meaningful, and I would have been in a much better position. Life wouldn't have been as painful as what it's going to be. And, having that regret, because I do feel the regret to this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that sentiment completely. Just that utter feeling of despair,
Mhm.
despondency, reaching the end of your rope. That's definitely what I view that stanza as being about, that crawling, that desperation.
Mhm.
Again, the corridor being some kind of passage of, whether it's time or if it's the passing of your prime. If you've come to a point where you just don't see how it's ever going to get any better, and you have no course to change it.
Maybe even the corridor could be a metaphor for traveling that passage to the afterlife itself. And he's crawling on it because maybe there's a force on the corridor pushing him out of it, saying, uh, this isn't your moment for this. And he's trying to maybe force his way in. And maybe, the crawling is all the amount of force that he can exert against that corridor because it's not ready to accept him. And he's trying to force the issue.
It could be, could be.
Man, I shouldn't have promised people this would be more uplifting than our episode about religious persecution. We'll end on a high note, I promise. We will come up with something, even if I have to talk about lollipops, kittens, and rainbows for a minute before we end. We will have a happier ending. Anyway, let's go on.
All right. So the next stanza reads, he hears the silence howling, catches angels as they fall, and the all-time winner has got him by the balls. He picks up Gideon's Bible, opens at page 1. So I read that, And I obviously on the surface, that's overtly religious to me. It mentions
Oh, absolutely.
angels. And so my notes on that is that I read it as the silence is the only communication Satan receives from God.
Hmm.
It howls as demons return to him, meaning Satan, unsuccessful in their efforts to seek and destroy Messiah. So again, going back to that, okay, we think it's a man. We go out, we influence Herod to kill all the babies. He killed all the babies, but somehow someone survives, and the promised one of the time still succeeds. And so Satan is, again, feeling like nothing he does works. And then every failure is another step closer to his ultimate damnation. So, in an act of utter desperation, Satan refers to God's revelation to humanity and reads the words that seal his fate. So if we examine the line Gideon's Bible and opened at page 1. Now, if we think about the Holy Bible as it is today, it's a combination of 66 books, starting with the Old Testament, going into the New Testament. But if you've ever picked up a Gideon's Bible in a hotel room, you will know that most copies are just the New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs. And so if you open at page 1, what are you going to find? You're going to find Matthew first. Matthew 1. What does that read? That's the genealogy of who? Jesus Christ. What
Ooh,
is significance there?
throwing it in his face.
Yeah. So finally, in this stanza, he is catching these demons as they fall to earth. Again, reckoning back to that story about Satan falling, the battle in heaven, the demons, and everything. So he's sending his people out into the world to seek and destroy Messiah. They are unsuccessful, coming back to him going, nope, that wasn't the guy. We killed him, and he didn't come back to life. Nothing happened. You're still here. And so but he understands that God's promises are going to be fulfilled. So he's got to keep going. Again, that crawling. And then so again, he references Gideon's Bible, which I've done a lot of research on, because it's a weird reference in the song. I'm like, why keep holy Gideon? It would have fit. And if he had opened the Holy Bible or just the Bible, he would have opened at Genesis 1. Well, if you're familiar with that, that's God created the heavens and the earth. Doesn't have a whole lot to do with
Yeah.
Satan. But
Yeah, it
Matthew,
doesn't really speak to the rest of the themes.
yeah,
Yeah,
but Matthew
I'm saying
1
that's
to the question. If you open Matthew 1 and it's the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and that's the Messiah, oh, mind blown. Satan realizes, uh-oh, I am in deep, deep snow, because I can't defeat Jesus. He's the God man. He has been born. I tried to kill him. That didn't work. And here he is. We're now in present time. We're reaching the end of the song. And so we're back to the present time. We know where Satan is at this point. He understands who Messiah is. Messiah is undefeatable. He now has to resign himself. And so that leads me to the last line in the song. God, he stole the handle, and the train won't stop going. No way to slow down. And then the song ends with just that reverberation. No way to slow down. No way to slow down. And what that means to me is, again, Satan is resigning himself to, I am defeated. Don't you feel bad for me? And then again, in classic folk tale storytelling, songwriting, a lot of times folk singers will start a song from the end and then work back to the beginning and kind of make a loop. And I believe that if you were to start up that piano again at the end of the song,
mm-hmm.
you would receive that full loop. So here he is, no way to slow down. You can't stop the unstoppable. It is what it is. If if you're going to look at this from Satan's perspective, the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ sealed the deal. Once that resurrection happened, he takes his throne in heaven. It's fulfilled. The Messiah came, the Messiah fulfilled, and now Satan is at this point defeated. It's just he's on death row at this. We're still waiting on a judgment day, an ultimate judgment day, but the battle is over. And so he's just, hanging out on death row, singing his woes.
I think that really clinches your interpretation together really, really beautifully. Um, I would love to hear what the songwriter would have to say to that, because I dare them to say that that is not a completely valid interpretation of the lyrics, because there's a lot of logical consistency with it. Um, when I was looking at this, I was thinking about that silence howling, and I was also thinking about how silence can be absolutely deafening when all you are wanting is communication, whether it's some acknowledgement that you're there, or if you're looking for comfort or just something, please tell me I exist. And I think that tied in with all these other verses about how he just feels like he doesn't really exist. It's as though he has already died and he's just wanting the physical to follow suit. The catching angels as they fall, the way I interpreted that is that he's seeing people who he perhaps admired or thought were good, maybe come down, something's revealed about them to where they weren't as good of a person as what they thought they were, or he sees someone who is genuinely good and he doesn't understand why they're having such troubles in their lives. He's seeing other people like himself who's struggling and he doesn't understand why all of this is happening. And so he's just seeing that this is more of the despair and all. And I think this is kind of the first time in the song that he lifts his eyes up beyond his own perspective and saying, oh, this is happening to other people. This is just clinching it. And that's also why I think this Charlie he keeps referring to is, he is meaning to refer to it as God, because, the all-time winner has everyone by the balls, not just him, but all these other people. And I think he's feeling almost as if he's just a plaything, made to suffer. Hope it entertained you, and that's all that it was. And with him picking up Gideon's Bible, I didn't know that about Gideon's Bible, about how it actually starts with Matthew. That I wasn't aware of. But opening at page 1, I saw this as someone trying to go back to essentially what they would consider to be their source material and trying to figure out, okay, what is actually going on? And and I don't know, it was really, really weird. As someone who's going back to the familiar, but not necessarily going back to find any kind of comfort. It's more just so if I'm going to suffer, I want an explanation for why this is taking place. I think he's still very angry. I think he's very resentful. I think he's despairing. And about the stealing of the handle, I think he's just resigned himself to that despair of, I was never going to be anything more than this. I don't know why I was brought into creation. I think you're just cruel and cold, and I just want this to end. And, with the no way it could slow down, I see that someone who's just wanting that end, longing for that end, hoping it ends with just non-existence, just anything other than whatever this is. It is a desperation for some form of escape. I mean, and it's sad, it's tragic. I think it's very representative of mindsets that people get trapped into when they become self-destructive, whether it's just behaviorally self-destructive or if it's physically self-destructive, either way. And it does seem like it's blaming, other people, the kids, work, your wife, your friend, people around you, their perception of what they think the divine is, blaming absolutely everything and never looking at their own personal conduct that helps shape this situation as much as everyone else's actions. It's a very, very defeatist, very defeatist.
Yeah. So yeah, it's one of those songs, like I said, many onion type layers, just on a super, just a superficial level, so to speak. If you're just listening to the song, it's very listenable. It's a great song. Just rock out the flute and and it's singable. It's not anything out of the reach. It's very short when you listen to it. I highly recommend anyone who's not familiar to go back and again listen to the music that accompanies the lyrics, because I believe a lot of the emotion is conveyed again through that music.
Mhm.
notes
The rhythm
themselves.
of it. Very much
Exactly.
like that train chugging along.
And that he and Ian Anderson did say that when he was writing the music, he wanted to kind of simulate, a locomotive's type of onward movement,
Mm-hmm.
the rhythmic, consistency there, so that it gets you going. I mean, I cannot listen to this song without moving. It is not a song to dance to, but I do dance. I bop around and I cannot help it. And it's just his own personality, I think, feeds into that, because there are a lot of songs that I move around to,
Mm-hmm.
that would otherwise not be considered a dance song.
Mm-hmm.
But there are, rhythms that just make you move. And this is one of those. But again, going back to that whole folklore loop style,
Mm-hmm.
if I invite people to look at it that way when they're hearing the song, as the juxtapose the beginning with the end. It kind of calms back down there at the end, and it kind of just refrains in that last word. You can't slow this down. It is a one-way track. You're on it. This is it. And I obviously, someone who is feeling this way themselves would definitely, I think, relate. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'm sure that there are people out there that have had every single one of these things happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
Their wife and their best friend and their children abandon them, and their work, they worked somewhere for 30 years, and then instead of getting a retirement package, they get the boot, they get laid off. They feel worthless and hopeless at their end, when, and with their golden years, they were supposed to have it all together, can't keep it all together. It's out of our control sometimes as to what happens to us. But how we respond to that is what's within our control. And so
For
again,
sure.
this particular subject's response is uh, you know, woe is me. Don't you feel bad for me? But we're all a wolf inside sometimes, and we want people to feel sorry for us and forgive us our own transgressions in the
Okay.
situation. Like, oh, the cop, the cops arrested me and I didn't do nothing. Well, what were you doing? Well, I was breaking into a bank, but I didn't actually steal nothing. That that kind of a mentality of, I am so innocent. I didn't actually get to do what I meant to do, so I'm therefore blameless in this situation. Why is everyone so against me? You know, so
Yeah.
it's
Well,
an
and when
interesting
yeah.
exercise
Well,
against good versus evil.
Well, and when we look at it through that perspective, like you just brought in, how people behave in society, I really feel like this song is the writers slap in the face against those people of saying, this is who you really are, and you're not special, and it's not glamorous, and a lot of this is self inflicted, and it is made actively worse by your refusal to own this. And judging from what you've told me about him earlier on in the video, I can definitely see that. It's just like it feels like a reproach, and honestly, it's a reproach that I think that a lot of people need because, again, no, spiritual convictions aside, we do need to take responsibility for ourselves, our lives, and our choices, and that is not currently in fashion, not in any way, shape, or form, and to disastrous consequence. I mean, we could point at any segment of society, any layer of it, and we could say, this is exactly what he was talking about. This is the kind of thinking and behavior, and this is the consequence of it. So I think it's a huge, huge wake up call, at least potentially, if
Yeah,
someone was listening with those kinds of ears.
yeah. I mean, what comes to mind, specifically for our time period in the post pandemic, was that we all adopted at some point or another, whether it be forced or it was voluntary, the mask wearing. So at the same time in history where we're worried about the planet and we're, uber concerned about saving and conserving things, millions upon millions of masks are now floating around in the ocean because we were too busy to put it in its proper receptacle anybody who's been to a parking lot in the last 2 years has seen it littered with these masks. And I'm thinking to myself, yes, that is humanity in a nutshell. You know, again, it's someone else's fault. Why is the climate the way it is? Why is the environment so polluted? Well, I'm too busy to, throw that mask out the window. Oh, it fell out of my car. I'm not going to bother to pick it up. Whatever the case is, we're to blame, but we don't want to blame ourselves. It's someone else. It's someone over there. It's this, it's that. And instead of just doing the right thing, we, project the whole, oh, I live in such a
Oh,
polluted city.
you
You know,
just reminded me of something because there was a phrase that came up in my head when I was doing my analysis, and it's that people don't actually want their problems to be solved. They just want to feel more comfortable. They just want to be comfortable again. They don't want to have those problems thrown up in their face. They want to ignore the consequences as long as possible, hoping that it will last them throughout their entire lifetime. And I think that's exactly what you were talking about just now. They don't, because if people are actually interested in solving a problem, they behave very differently. And but when they just want comfort, it's that emotional appeal. It's not, I don't have ideas about what to do. Can I bounce something off of you? Maybe you'll think of something that I won't. That's someone who wants to solve someone. But the person who just wants comfort, that's focusing on all their hyper emotionalisms, they'll tell you all their woes. And when you suggest that perhaps a change would be necessary, suddenly the conversation changes and they recoil, and that wasn't what they were wanting to hear. I have come across this many, many times, especially when it's coming to paganism, because again, that's not a pattern that some people have yet to unlearn, and it really tells me something about where that person is emotionally, but also spiritually.
Yeah, I mean, I find that within the Christian circles too. That is a very prevalent problem. Is that the world is against, against us, and that all of the problems of the world have nothing to do with us. you know and I have to take a big step back and go,
Must be nice to be that
no, it
special, huh?
is. And it's all your problem, but because you've been tasked with solving the problem, you've been given, if you believe in the Christian tradition, you've been given the tools to solve the problems. And yet all we want to do is cry and whine about, what music we're going to play Sunday and what's proper church attire. And,
Worrying about
you have
trivialities.
the cultural Christianity that's so prevalent today, prosperity gospel and seeker sensitive movement, and they're kind of adopting world views outside of Orthodox tradition to entice people to come in. And you start muddying the waters, and then you wonder why you have so many problems. But again, it's not you. You're doing everything right, and it's an introspection problem. A lot of us have lost that art of examining in truth what it is that's wrong with us. And even as in modern psychology, it's not your fault. It's this, it's that, it's external. It's
It's
always
society. Of course it is. Do you
it's your
remember
you were hugged too much, you're smothered, you're not, whatever the problem is, it's always external. It's never an internal issue
and you
that
could
you
never be, yeah, and you couldn't possibly be expected to cope with any of it. But do you remember that TV commercial from when we were kids of I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid? I think maybe that got heard and listened to a few too many times because I think that became part of our generation's base programming, which is why everyone is, blaming us for everything from, the events of the world to, to why, they can't find their favorite shirt in the morning. And, some of it is deserved because I think we were trained not to mature. And so those of us who have been actively pursuing it, it's almost as though we're having to rediscover the process because that wasn't what we were raised to do. And I think this relates to um, Oh, the Witch on Witch that George and I did when we were talking about people's issues with death. It's that, the older generation, they think if they keep us young and everyone else young and dependent on them, then they'll never die and they'll go on forever. It's this evasion of reality and the natural progression of time and our own obligations in reference to that natural progression. And I mean, I think that's the root. I mean, and until we address it, I think we'll continue to go on with a lot of the really horrible patterns that we have, and until we hit the brick wall, which it feels close. I don't know about you, but that brick wall feels awfully close to me.
Sure. Yeah. I think that, again, if you want to feel empowered in your own life and feeling good about things in general, having some kind of purpose,
Hmm.
reaching outside of yourself. And this may be the high note. You have the ability to do that,
There it
but
is.
you have to reach out for that. You cannot look and navel gaze and find your purpose.
Yeah.
You have to find your purpose within where you fit in the rest of this tapestry. And that's going to give you the most meaning, the most fulfillment. You may not get the Air Jordans, but you might have a kid that takes care of you in your old age. There's a trade-off, there's a payoff,
Yeah.
there's a, and
What's more important? I
yeah,
mean, it's
and
also about priorities.
right, and teaching the younger generations how to care for themselves is a selfish act in such a way that when you do get old and feeble, they're going to know how to take care of you, and they are going to take care of you rather than throw you out with yesterday's trash and be like, be gone, old man. you
Yeah, I
know
mean, you got to think about what kind of example you're setting, both, within the family and on the broader societal scale. Oh, yeah, we have traversed some territory with this one.
you can kind of steer off of the whole, death is inevitable and demise and destruction and it's all lit, to, well, no, we have an opportunity that even though we may be on a track, we're still on some kind of train because we're humans and we can't be anything other than humans.
Hmm.
So let's be the best humans that we can be. Let's work together. Let's try to be peaceable. Let's use logic and reason. I would say it's my God-given brain. Other people would just be your brain.
Hmm.
So, but I mean, if you use those things to your advantage as tools to make things better, then you will see fruit in that. Everyone
Hmm.
should see a fruit in that. So that's all worldviews, all religions, in absence of religion. I mean, atheists are capable of being what we would consider good people. They're
Hmm.
not murderers. They help. They're peaceable. That's the best that we can ask of
Yeah.
other humans. That's all I would ever ask of other humans is, okay, if you don't agree with me religiously, eschatology, things like that, put all that to bed. That's fine. How do we live today without killing each other? How do we set it up so our children don't kill each other?
Hmm.
Let's do that. And if we can agree on that, then we can get through this time and space and we'll worry about the ether later.
Yeah.
That
There,
this is for another day, you know.
well,
But
it's like Master Yoda said, his criticism of Obi-Wan Kenobi of, all his life he looked to the future, never his mind on where he was and what he was doing. And I feel that line so much because, as you say, we have concerns in our fully corporeal forms that we need to attend to today. And if we were focused on doing a good job on that, I think a lot of problems take care of themselves or they don't arise or they are at least mitigated. I mean, I don't think we can ever completely do away with conflict. I'm not a utopian. I don't believe in that. I just don't think it's natural. But we can certainly limit the scope of what's going on. We can recognize people who are leading us to the slaughter for reasons of their own, and we can make decisions to say, okay, maybe those are the people who don't run the government. Maybe those are people who we deprive of power in every possible way just because they're dangerous, because their way of thinking is very sick. And I think that's part of our own growth and healing process as a species, just as a human species, of saying, recognize the people who are hurting you and say you are no longer in charge. And now the process of getting them out of power, that's, I think multi-pronged, and it's complicated. I'm not saying we can do this tomorrow, but I think certainly by training ourselves and by having these conversations just as citizens, I think we can make progress on that and just say, you're not the grown up, you're ill, we're very sorry that you're ill, we will try to steer psychological and medicine in such a direction so that it can help you. We encourage you to find some kind of spiritual meaning and some sort of path, but you cannot be in charge.
Right. I agree. I agree. I don't necessarily wish, ill on any particular person, but I would like to see a lot of people be more obscure and just go off into the sunset and never be heard from again, ever, ever.
Yeah.
And that's not a left or right issue. I despise people on both sides of the aisle for our own country, but then, also on a world stage, there are people out there that would be like, wow, if the people actually had a choice, would they choose this? Or is this just, birthright? With think about dictatorships and things like that, where the next leader is kind of born into the family, and or they're given some kind of divinity anointment or something like that, and I'm thinking, I don't know about that.
Let's not
You
do
know,
that. Let's keep government humble.
yeah, let's continue to choose our leaders, and if we choose to unelect them, that should be an option, always on the table. It shouldn't be, oh well, we'll just live with it for the next 4 years and then we'll vote again. No,
Yeah.
I'm very less forgiving. I think that, the calamity that has been the last 18 months is more than what warrants a total just clean house. Just
Oh,
let's,
absolutely.
if you've worked for the government in the last decade, you're out. You just don't apply.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you on that one. And to take it down to even the personal level, I think we also need to kind of identify it, because not every person who we have a relationship with, in some sense of the term, not necessarily romantic relationships, but not everyone in our lives is actually a helpful or a beneficial influence. I think we do need to do a better job of bring back, that dreaded word, judgment. And recognize when someone means you ill, because the people who preach the strongest against, oh, you must never judge anyone for anything, I'm thinking, you do realize that's how very abusive people maintain their power over you, and it enables them to hurt you again and again and again. So I think we have boundary issues as a species. I think we need to relearn some things, not to constantly have everyone under a microscope and saying, "Oh, you made one mistake, so I'm throwing you out of my life." I'm not talking about that, but when there is an established pattern and someone obviously does not mean someone else well, let's start recognizing that, and let's start, no longer inviting such people to our circles, because look, you've got to have some kind of judgment. And as much as people criticize, the Christian church, oh, they're too judgmental. Well, let's talk about pagan societies. You think there were not judgments there? I absolutely guarantee there were. Have you never read the Havamal? Have you never read Celtic triads? There was distinctions made between society, between, who was a hard worker, who was lazy, who was taking care of their families and being upstanding citizen, and who was not, who was, abiding by just law, and who was breaking them and just, for the hell of it. That people were in different camps with that. So, I mean, I don't think you can have society that's going to survive without having some form of judgment. But I mean, I just think there's a lot of internal work about rejecting self-destructive impulses and recognizing them for what they are, which if our person in the song we've been talking about had done any of that work, yeah, maybe he would have been in a better position.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, going back to a story, a tradition of God versus Satan. I Satan is an interesting character to me because he is this, created being, an angel, high importance in the beginning, and then he falls. and he disavows God, and all that is, becomes the antithesis of the attributes of God, is void of God, represents everything bad. Never once does it occur, or maybe it cannot occur to him, to ask for forgiveness. You know what I
Huh.
mean?
Oh,
It's
that's an
like
interesting take on the narrative. I
so
mean,
self-absorbed, and again, I am supreme, but knowing that he's not really, he just can't bring himself. That pride, I mean, that's mentioned a lot. Pride was his sin. He thought he was, better than God, thought he could do a better job. And you know it's one of those things. I see that in humanity, where we're like, oh well, if I were the king, then things would run perfectly. That's why the young people think that socialism is going to work, because they're in charge this time. And it's folly. And, us older folks are like, no, 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 no. Let's not forget that there was a young Stalin, there was a young Hitler, there was a young Pol Pot. Do you think that when they were 4, 5, 10 years old, they were, now Klaus Schwab, maybe, but the other guys, I don't see their childhood being abnormal in such a way that would just, make them so psychotic. That is a course of time where they're influenced
and not
by
making
their
decisions.
perceived injustices. They want to, I mean, you hear again, sympathy for the devil. If you hear the wolf talk about it, the chickens were made for him to eat. So why are you so upset when he eats them? The Satan is like, well, this world is corrupt. So why is everybody so mad at me when people go to genocide? you know and the criminal will never incriminate himself, and never examines himself. Very rarely will you see a criminal say, yeah, I am guilty, have no excuse, have mercy on me. In those circumstances where you do see the justice system ease. That, again, on just a human to human level, if you've been wronged by somebody and then they come back and they're just no excuse, like, I was wrong and I hope you forgive me, you automatically are like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. you could have
There is something to
been
that.
you could have been spitting mad, could have killed him in a back alley somewhere if you had the chance. But as soon as they apologize, it's like, oh, no, it wasn't a big deal. But, was it? Was it not? I don't know. So
Well,
there's something about that apology and that humility that I think, Satan lacks toward God, that causes the whole conflict to start with. And then he can't back down. He's too
well,
prideful.
and Well,
You
and that
know,
humility, that dives back into what we've said about personal responsibilities, like, oh, I goofed. And, there is a difference of that. I actually experienced that at work. I had a boss, and it was one of those things of, I thought he was very good. I preferred him over other bosses, but there were days when strangling him felt like the right thing to do. And it never failed. Whenever I was working up a really good mad, suddenly he would do something that was just incredibly useful and very, very helpful, something the other supervisors weren't doing, something that technically he didn't have to do, but he saw that it needed to be taken care of. And so he went ahead and did it. And I thought, oh, you took the wind out of my sails, man. I was working up for a good old fashioned knockdown drag out, and you just ruined it for me. But I mean, it lowers tensions, and I think that's what the real function of humility and responsibility does, is that it lowers those tensions, which is why when you have a society that encourages that sort of thing, where you do see, a reduction of conflict, it's much more manageable because you're not letting it build up like a volcano.
right, right. I mean, there is something to be said about, being able to kind of back off a position and
Hmm.
say, okay, let's agree to disagree. I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
that's the only resolution. But again, it does break that tension
Hmm.
where you're like, okay, that's resolved. There's resolution there.
Yeah.
So, again, looking back at the song, I think that's where there's a lack
Hmm.
of self-awareness or humility, or a combination of the two, that breeds that depression and desperation and despair, and then a suicidal tendency. And again, you want that I'm the victim, feel bad for me, don't you feel bad for me. And so, yeah, look at it that way when you listen to it again. Listen to the actual flow of the music, and see if you can see where I'm coming from. Again, I've created this story, this narrative
Hmm.
in my mind based on my
Hmm.
Christian worldview, but it could really just, again, be a broad base of good versus evil, or justice versus injustice, perceived persecution versus actual persecution. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot layers there, but I think the theme is, I'm the victim, and we have that mentality en masse right now. I'm the victim, woe is me, everyone please, you need to bow down to me and cater to me, and make me feel better, because again, my problems are external, so it's your fault that I'm a shitty person.
Yeah.
you know
And the nice thing I think about how both of our takeaways from this song is that I think anyone listening to this could 100% see how we got there. At least I think we laid out a better case than the original writer, where I am scratching my head. I don't believe you. I think he's funning with us. I think he is. But yeah, I think this has been really, really good. I think we covered a whole lot of territory. We've been talking almost an hour and a half about it. So
wow.
uh, you were right. I mean, when we first got together and started talking, like, do we want to have a couple songs we talked about? Like, oh no, this will do it. I'm like, well, okay, I'll trust you. And I'm so glad I did, because otherwise we'd have been here all afternoon.
Right.
But everyone who's been watching with us, thank you for taking the whole journey with us for a start. And also, let us know if you would like us to do this more often. Did you enjoy hearing us kind of compare and contrast? Would you like us to look at other songs or stories or movies or what have you? Let us know about that in the comment section for sure, or see us on Gilded and, make your request in person. That's absolutely open to you as well. And just let us know what you think. And if you had a very different interpretation to the song, tell us about that too, because
Yes.
yeah, there's definitely more than one way to be looking at this thing, as we demonstrated. But
Yes.
thank you,
Again.
everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for doing this with me. I think we will have to do this again on another occasion. And yeah,
Sure.
bye, everybody.
Bye bye.